What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another deep dive episode of Spotlight Murder by Skoob. I'm your host, Kieran Caldwell, and today we're unpacking one of hip-hop's most controversial and heartbreaking stories. We're talking about Jahseh Dwayne Ricardo Onfroy, the artist the world knew as XXXTentacion. This isn't just another celebrity murder case, folks. This is a story that cuts through the complexities of fame, artistic genius, human darkness, and our endless search for truth in an age where conspiracy theories can overshadow facts. Over the next hour, we'll journey from the rise of a musical revolutionary to the shocking events of June 18th, 2018, and the legal battle that followed. But here's what makes this story truly captivating. It's not just about what happened, but how we processed it, questioned it, and ultimately pursued justice. So buckle up, because we're diving deep into the XXXTentacion story. Let's start at the beginning. January 23rd, 1998, Plantation, Florida. A child is born who would eventually revolutionize how we think about music, emotion, and artistic expression. But Jahseh's path to greatness wasn't paved with gold records and red carpets. It was carved through struggle, pain, and an almost supernatural to transform trauma into art. Growing up in Florida, Jahseh faced what many would consider insurmountable challenges. Troubled family background, legal issues from a young age, an environment that could have easily consumed him. But instead of letting these circumstances destroy him, he used them as fuel. In 2013, at just 15 years old, Jahseh started uploading music to the internet. This wasn't your typical teenage garage band situation. This kid was creating something completely different, taking the raw pain of his experiences and molding it into soundscapes that defied traditional genre boundaries. Picture this. You're scrolling through SoundCloud, expecting the usual amateur rap attempts, and suddenly, you hear something that stops you in your tracks. That's what happened to thousands who discovered XXXTentacion's early work. His music wasn't just hip-hop. It was hip-hop infused with rock, emo, and something indefinably personal. What made his music so powerful wasn't just the genre blending. It was the emotional honesty. In a world where rap often focused on wealth and bravado, here was this young artist openly discussing depression, anxiety, and mental health struggles. He wasn't afraid to show vulnerability, and that vulnerability became his superpower. The SoundCloud generation was hungry for authenticity, and Jahseh delivered it in spades. His followers weren't just fans, they were believers. They saw themselves in his struggles, found comfort in his pain, and discovered hope in his artistic expression. By 2017, that underground following had grown into something massive. "Look at Me" became his breakthrough hit, and suddenly the entire music industry was paying attention. The song's success wasn't just about catchy beats or clever lyrics. It was about a generation finally hearing their inner turmoil reflected in mainstream music. But here's what's fascinating about his rise. It wasn't manufactured by record labels or industry executives. This was organic growth, built on genuine connection between artist and audience. Social media became his stage, and his fans became his promoters. Then came August 2017, a pivotal moment in hip-hop history. XXXTentacion released 17, his debut studio album, and completely redefined what rap could be. This wasn't an album in the traditional sense. It was more like an audio diary of a young man's struggle with depression and suicidal thoughts. 17 was just 22 minutes long, but those 22 minutes packed more emotional weight than albums twice its length. Jahseh stripped away typical rap bravado and gave listeners something unprecedented: raw, unfiltered mental health commentary set to haunting melodies. The album's vulnerability was both its strength and its controversy. Critics didn't know how to categorize it. Was it rap, alternative rock, emo revival? The answer was simple. It was XXXTentacion, and XXXTentacion was uncategorizable. Young listeners, many dealing with their own mental health struggles, found solace in Jase's openness. Depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, topics that were whispered about or ignored, were suddenly being discussed openly in mainstream music. March 2018, just 3 months before his death, XXXTentacion released. And with it, he proved his artistic evolution was far from complete. Debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, showcasing an artist who refused to be boxed in. The album was a sonic adventure through multiple emotional and musical landscapes. Essa Dia became a massive hit, but it was the overall artistic growth that really demonstrated his evolution. He'd learned to reach broader audiences without sacrificing the emotional honesty that made him unique. But here's where our story takes a darker turn. No discussion of XXXTentacion can be complete without acknowledging the controversies that shadowed his career. Throughout his rise to fame, Jase faced serious legal troubles that many argued contradicted the positive messages in his music. These weren't minor infractions. These were serious allegations that sparked intense debate about separating art from artist. The legal issues created a complex dynamic around his career. Millions of fans found genuine help in his music, while victims and advocates argued that talent shouldn't excuse harmful behavior. This controversy followed him everywhere. Award shows, media interviews, collaboration opportunities. Everything was filtered through these legal troubles. Some artists refused to work with him, while others defended his right to artistic expression. What made this particularly complex was Jase's own acknowledgement of his past mistakes. In interviews and social media posts, he often spoke about trying to become better, learning from errors, using his platform for positive change. But critics argued acknowledgement without accountability wasn't enough. Now we come to June 18th, 2018, the date that changed everything. It started ordinarily for Jase. He planned to go motorcycle shopping in Deerfield Beach, Florida, with his step-uncle Leonard Carr. Simple afternoon, look at bikes, maybe make a purchase, head home. Nobody could predict how this routine outing would end. But first, a critical decision. Jase stopped at a local bank and withdrew substantial cash, tens of thousands of dollars. Not unusual for motorcycle shopping, but carrying that much cash made him an incredibly attractive target. What Jase didn't know was that he was being watched. 4 men had been tracking his movements: Michael Boatwright, Dedrick Williams, Trayvon Newsome, and Robert Allen. This wasn't random. This was carefully orchestrated. The planning level is chilling. These men had studied Jase's routines, identified vulnerabilities, coordinated their attack. They knew he'd be at the dealership, knew about the cash, knew exactly when to strike. At the dealership, Williams and Allen actually entered first, not to buy anything, for reconnaissance. They wanted to confirm Jase's identity and ensure they had the right target. The calculated coldness of walking in, looking at their intended victim, and confirming they were about to destroy a young life for money. Meanwhile, Jase and Leonard were inside discussing motorcycles, completely unaware of the danger building around them, living in those last moments of normalcy before everything changed forever. Surveillance footage later showed the suspects arriving in a dark SUV, positioning themselves strategically. They weren't waiting for opportunity. They were creating it. Every movement deliberate, every position calculated. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Jase and Leonard finished their business and headed toward their vehicle. In those final normal moments, they were probably discussing their next move. They had no idea 4 armed men were watching every step. The dark SUV suddenly sprang into action. The 4 suspects exited with guns drawn. What followed was a brutal, efficient attack that lasted minutes but changed everything forever. Leonard, realizing immediate danger, made a split-second decision that probably saved his life. He ran. Surveillance footage captured him fleeing as attackers focused on Jase. Natural survival instinct, but imagine the trauma of abandoning your loved one to save yourself. Jase, now alone facing armed criminals, was completely at their mercy. Michael Boatwright, later identified as the shooter, fired multiple shots. These weren't warning shots. These were fired with lethal intent. The shooting was brutal and quick. Jesse fell, critically wounded, life bleeding away in a Florida parking lot. But the attackers weren't finished. Even as he lay dying, they continued their robbery, taking the Louis Vuitton bag containing approximately $50,000. Think about the cold calculation. A young man, only 20, dying from gunshot wounds, and these criminals focused on completing their theft. No mercy, no hesitation, no humanity. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but damage was too severe. Despite their efforts, Jesse Dwayne Ricardo Onfroy, XXXTentacion, was pronounced dead. At just 20 years old, a voice that spoke to millions was silenced forever. The autopsy provided crucial evidence for prosecuting his killers. It revealed Jesse was shot multiple times, with the most devastating wound being a gunshot to the chest that damaged his heart and vital organs, causing fatal internal bleeding. Additional bullets struck his arms and legs, but none as immediately life-threatening as that chest wound. This tells us Michael Boatwright wasn't firing randomly. He was aiming to kill. Significantly, the autopsy showed no other health problems. Jesse's organs were healthy and functioning normally before the attack. Toxicology tests showed no alcohol or drugs. He was completely sober and fully aware during the attack. Perhaps most telling was the absence of defensive wounds. No signs he tried to protect himself, suggesting he was caught completely off guard with no time to defend himself or escape. The investigation began immediately, showcasing modern police work at its finest. Law enforcement had surveillance footage, witness testimony, and physical evidence. Cameras captured the entire crime: the SUV arriving, suspects exiting, their actions during and after the shooting. But investigators went deeper, tracing the suspects' movements before and after, discovering how they planned the robbery and waited for the right moment. Physical evidence included blood and other traces in their SUV, directly linking them to the crime scene. Within days, police identified their primary suspects. The speed showed both evidence quality and officer dedication. Arrests began shortly after, each suspect charged with first-degree murder and armed robbery. When trial began, the courtroom became theater for one of the most compelling murder cases in recent memory. The prosecution's strategy was straightforward: present overwhelming evidence clearly and systematically. Multiple eyewitnesses testified about what they saw: the SUV's arrival, suspicious behavior, the violence that followed. But perhaps most crucial testimony came from Leonard Carr, XXXTentacion's step-uncle and only surviving witness. Leonard's testimony was devastating. He described how June 18th started normally, their excitement about motorcycle shopping. No indication danger was lurking. His account of recognizing the threat, seeing armed men exit their SUV, those split seconds of recognition must have felt like a lifetime. His description of the attack's speed and violence helped the jury understand how overwhelming the assault was. Leonard explained attackers moved quickly and efficiently, giving victims no time to react. This wasn't robbery escalating to violence. This was planned violence from the beginning. The most difficult part: Leonard explaining his decision to run for safety while his step-nephew was attacked. He had to relive those traumatic moments while facing potential judgment about his actions. His testimony about hearing gunshots as he ran was particularly powerful. His identification of Michael Boatwright as the shooter was crucial evidence. Leonard testified he saw Boatwright aim and fire multiple times. This eyewitness identification directly connected Boatwright to murder. Police officers walked the jury through surveillance footage frame by frame. Forensic experts provided scientific backing. Ballistics specialists confirmed bullets matched weapons connected to suspects. DNA analysts explained blood evidence linking suspects to the crime scene. Here's where our story takes a fascinating turn into speculation. During trial, defense attorneys made a shocking suggestion that caught everyone's attention. They implied rapper Drake might somehow be connected to XXXTentacion's murder. This wasn't random accusation. It was calculated legal strategy designed to create reasonable doubt. The defense's Drake theory wasn't based on concrete evidence, but on circumstances and statements they argued warranted investigation. The foundation rested on documented tension between Drake and XXXTentacion. Both operated in competitive hip-hop, where feuds are common. But this wasn't typical industry competition. There were genuine hostilities and public exchanges creating a backdrop of conflict. The most compelling piece cited by conspiracy theorists was an alleged social media post by XXXTentacion shortly before his death. According to claims, Yase wrote, "If anyone kills me, it's Drake." If true, this would represent direct accusation from the victim himself. Defense attorneys argued this statement should have prompted police to investigate Drake thoroughly. They questioned why law enforcement never officially interviewed Drake or associates. Oversight or pressure to avoid investigating such a high-profile figure. Conspiracy theorists pointed to what they saw as suspicious behavior by Drake following XXXTentacion's death. They analyzed social media posts, public statements, even musical releases for hidden meanings or guilty knowledge. However, it's crucial to understand no concrete evidence was ever presented linking Drake to the crime. No DNA, no witness testimony, no phone records, no financial connections. Nothing typically required to seriously consider someone a suspect. Drake publicly denied any involvement. After XXXTentacion's death, he expressed condolences and sorrow. His representatives dismissed conspiracy theories as baseless attempts to distract from real perpetrators. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the case went to the jury. What followed were more than 27 hours of deliberation, 12 citizens carefully weighing everything they'd heard. Their decision's weight was enormous. The deliberation length showed the jury took responsibility seriously. They reviewed surveillance footage, examined physical evidence, discussed witness testimony in detail. Every piece had to be considered, every reasonable doubt explored. When the verdict was announced, it was swift and decisive. Michael Boatwright, Dedrick Williams, and Trayvon Newsom were found guilty of first-degree murder and armed robbery. The first-degree murder conviction was particularly significant because it confirmed the jury believed the crime was premeditated and intentional. The guilty verdict represented more than legal victory. For XXXTentacion's family and fans, it provided closure and justice. The legal system had worked as intended, holding perpetrators accountable. The conviction also sent a broader message about violent crime consequences. In an era where high-profile cases sometimes end without convictions, this verdict demonstrated that overwhelming evidence and thorough police work could still lead to justice. For defendants, guilty verdict meant facing possibility of life imprisonment. Their decisions on June 18, 2018, had not only ended XXXTentacion's life, but effectively ended their own freedom. The verdict sparked reactions across the music industry and social media. Fans expressed relief that justice had been served, while reflecting on the tragic loss that made the trial necessary. The Drake theory was just part of a much larger conspiracy ecosystem that emerged around XXXTentacion's death. In our digital age, high-profile murders often become breeding grounds for alternative theories, and social media platforms became echo chambers where speculation transformed into perceived fact. One persistent category involved other music industry figures. Given XXXTentacion's complicated relationships within hip-hop, conspiracy theorists suggested various scenarios involving rival artists, record label disputes, or industry power struggles. These theories often lacked evidence, but gained momentum through online repetition. Another angle focused on his personal life and past associations. His history of legal troubles created fertile ground for theories about retaliation or revenge. Some suggested the murder was payback for past incidents. Others proposed complex scenarios involving criminal organizations. Perhaps most outlandish was the idea that XXXTentacion had faked his own death. This theory suggested he'd gone into hiding to escape threats or generate posthumous publicity. Supporters pointed to supposed inconsistencies in media reports or unusual social media activity after his death. The faked death theory was easily debunked by overwhelming evidence: witness testimony, surveillance footage, autopsy results, the subsequent murder trial. However, like many conspiracy theories, it persisted among believers despite contradictory evidence. YouTube channels dedicated to conspiracy theories found XXXTentacion's death particularly engaging content. These channels often presented speculation as investigation, connecting dots that didn't necessarily form coherent pictures but created compelling narratives. The persistence of conspiracy theories highlighted the difficulty many fans had accepting the randomness and senselessness of their idol's death. It's psychologically easier to believe in complex plots than accept that a talented young artist was killed simply for money in his bag. XXXTentacion's story isn't just about fame or tragedy. It's about how brilliance and darkness can live in the same soul. In a few short years, he changed hip-hop forever, turning pain into poetry and emotion into art. His songs spoke to millions who felt unseen, proving that vulnerability could be power. But behind the music was chaos, violence, redemption, and choices that ended too many lives too soon. Was it fame that destroyed him, or the world that demanded too much from a broken soul? The truth is deeper than headlines can tell. Want to hear the full story? The conspiracies, the case, the legacy that still divides fans today? Download the Skoob app now and dive into the complete episode, because some stories deserve to be heard till the very end. Complex chapters. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and remember, the truth is usually more complicated than the headlines suggest.